We're just going to continue on from yesterday, and we are now looking at right mindfulness, right samma sati, on the Noble Eightfold Path, and we have been just finishing off the Satipatthana Sutta. And one of the things that always strikes me after having read through the Satipatthana Sutta and having looked at the various types of contemplations that are there, sometimes I wonder, how exactly are we supposed to practice these satipatthanas? When you read them, they are quite abstract. There's not very much concrete information on exactly how you're supposed to practice them. Of course, the first satipatthana about the body contemplation is fairly easy to understand. You look at the 31 parts of the body, the 4 elements. It is fairly clear how you're supposed to do those kind of contemplations. But then when you come to the Vedananupassana, the contemplation of feelings, the Chittanupassana, the contemplation of mind qualities, it becomes much more unclear exactly how we're supposed to do that. And you hear many people having very different interpretations and understanding on how these things are supposed to be practiced. For example, one of the typical understandings of the Vedananupassana is just feeling the body, right? Feeling all the feelings in the body. And this is what the Goenka tradition is very famous for, going through the feelings in the body and feeling that. And that is then considered Vedananupassana. And the Buddha doesn't actually give any instruction. He doesn't say that this is how you're supposed to do it. He doesn't say this is not how you're supposed to do it. So it's just one interpretation of how the Vedananupassana is supposed to be done. And the same thing with Chittanupassana. Again, there's very little instructions there. It just says that you have to know these mind states. It doesn't say whether you should do it while meditating or outside of meditation. It doesn't say you can do it with a meditation object or just do it freely with bare awareness. It's kind of left very open. And there is a monk in Burma, quite a well-known monk in Burma, who does Chittanupassana, and that's all he does, and just awareness of the mind at all times. So that is kind of his interpretation of how to do Satipatthana. All you have to do is be aware of the qualities of the mind. So it is left very open, and it's very kind of difficult to pin it down exactly how you're supposed to do these things. And for this reason, it is very useful to know that the whole Satipatthana can be done very simply by doing breath meditation, anapanasati. This is one of those things that is I find very useful in the suttas when they draw the things together. And anapanasati is sufficient, it says, to fulfill all the 4 satipatthanas. That's all you have to do, basically. And then the instructions become very clear, because then all we have to do is go to the Satipatthana Sutta, understand the instructions there, and then you're actually doing the Chittanupassana, Vedananupassana, Kayanupassana, and all that as a consequence of doing Anapanasati here. So that is just a little bit of background. So let us have a look and see what this sutta says. This is Anapanasati Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 118, mindfulness of breathing here. And one thing to know about this particular sutta is that this setup, the way it is taught here, the central stages of Anapanasati, is something you see throughout the suttas in many, many different places. It's very common teaching, and for that reason I understand it to be quite significant. In fact, there is a whole Anapanasati or Anapana Samyutta dedicated to Anapanasati. It's quite short, but still there is a special Samyutta just for this. Okay, so this is how this sutta goes. This is just an extract from the kind of main part of the sutta, and this is how it is. Because when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it is of great fruit and great benefit. When mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it fulfills the 4 focuses of mindfulness. When the 4 focuses of mindfulness are developed and cultivated, they fulfill the 7 awakening factors. When the 7 awakening factors are developed and cultivated, they fulfill true knowledge and deliverance. Right, so here this is just what I was saying just before. Mindfulness of breathing in its own fulfills the 4 focuses of mindfulness, the 4 satipatthanas. It's all you have to do to practice satipatthana all the way through is just following the breath. So this kind of narrows things down, makes it quite simple, and now you can understand more clearly what are the precise instructions for these satipatthana practices. And then, because you are fulfilling the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you are also fulfilling the 7 awakening factors as well, right? And because you're fulfilling those, you're actually fulfilling everything to the very end of the path. True knowledge here is vidya. This is equivalent to the te vidyas we had talked about briefly before, the recollection of past lives and understanding karma, and also the final awakening. And then true knowledge and deliverance, right? Deliverance meaning here vimutti, the final freedom, when everything is when you are free of the defilements and free of suffering, of course, which is what we are looking for here. So quite handy, right? Mindfulness of breathing will take you all the way to the end of the path, to arahantship, to the culmination of all the good things that you're seeking for in this practice. So a very powerful technique when practiced in the right way. So this is kind of the crucial thing. How do we practice this in accordance with how the Buddha taught and trying to interpret his teachings in the right way? So this is how it starts out. And how, bhikkhus, is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit? Here, a bhikkhu gone to the forest or to the root of a tree or to an empty hut sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, sets his body erect, and having established mindfulness in front of him, ever mindful he breathes in, ever mindful he breathes out. So this is how it is done, so that it is of great fruit and great benefit, right? So this obviously means taking you to the very end of the path. So these instructions are the ones to follow if you want to cultivate this to the absolute, to the highest degree here. And it starts off here, and this of course is an important instruction at the very beginning, gone to the forest, to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut. Right, so basically mindfulness of breathing, if it's going to have the full benefit of taking you all the way to the end of the path, that is a practice that you undertake in seclusion. We talked about this before, the viveka, how the Noble Eightfold Path is viveka nisita. It is based on, founded on viveka, and this here you have first of all the body, kaya viveka, the bodily seclusion, then leading on to the chitta viveka later on, one step leading to the next one. So this viveka is important. The path is developed based on this viveka, and this is what you're seeing here. And this is why you see the emphasis in the suttas often on dwelling in these empty huts at the foot of a tree in the forest. This is why the forest tradition is often considered one of the main traditions of Buddhism around the world, one of the kind of the tradition that sustains the meditation of the whole Buddhist community, is the most powerful part often of the meditation tradition in any Buddhist country or Buddhist Nikaya or whatever it is. And it's very interesting, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha talks about the 7 factors that will sustain the Bhikkhu Sangha and the Sasana in the future, right? The 7 aparihaniya dhamma or something like that. And one of those 7 things that he talks about is that the sasana will flourish, the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni sangha will flourish as long as the monastics delight in forest dwellings. In other words, this idea of the forest tradition and dwelling in the forest is a core aspect of all of Buddhism, and it is there that the future of Buddhism actually is ensured through the forest dwelling. So very, very interesting how important this is in Buddhism. And of course, this is also why we go on retreats. Even as lay people, you go on retreats, right? You come here. This is kind of a halfway house between the home life and living completely secluded in the forest. You come here, you get away from your daily business, daily activities, and it gives you a little bit of taste of that kind of seclusion. And eventually, if you develop further, then of course you take that to the full seclusion that is talked about here. The Buddha often says in the suttas, he says, there are these empty huts, these roots of trees. Do not delay, bhikkhus. Get into the business of meditating. Jayata bhikkhave. Jayata is the word jayati is the verbal form of jhana, right? Meditate. So basically, get into jhana, that's almost what it says. So practice jhana, get into these empty huts and practice, lest you regret it later. Now you have the opportunity, you don't know when it will come again. So the importance of seclusion there, right at the outset. It is really a practice to be done in seclusion. And then you sit down, right? So mindfulness of breathing is essentially a practice you do while sitting down, precisely because it takes so much mindfulness. It's something that is difficult to do in other postures. You can perhaps do it while lying down, but again, that takes even more mindfulness to do it when you're lying down. And so it is basically a sitting down practice. Otherwise you might end up like that monk who took the wrong route on his pindabata because he didn't know what he was doing anymore. He was following his breath so intently here. So it's a sitting practice. And how do you sit down? Well, you fold your legs crosswise. It says here, palankang abhujitva. And often you will hear as a consequence of this instruction in the Anapanasati Sutta that to practice meditation properly you have to sit cross-legged. I'm not sure if it should be taken quite like that. There are a couple of at least one reference in the suttas to somebody not being at ease, not being relaxed without sitting cross-legged. So the idea in India at that time, 2,500 years ago, this may have been the natural sitting posture in which people felt at ease and relaxed, right? That's how you felt most at ease when sitting cross-legged. So I understand this in that way, that it is about finding a posture which is at ease. Of course, sitting cross-legged is very nice. Once you get used to it, it's a very comfortable position. It actually feels very steady and sturdy. So if you feel comfortable with that, certainly use the cross-legged position. But if you don't find it comfortable, if you find it difficult, most of us have grown up sitting on chairs, and suddenly you have to sit on the floor. It can be quite hard. After a while, your knees cave in and nothing really works anymore. I know monks who have destroyed their knees by forcing themselves too much, sitting cross-legged, and then it becomes counterproductive. And now they have to sit on chairs all the time, right? Because they can't sit cross-legged anymore. So be wise about this. The main point here, as I understand it, is a comfortable position is the main thing. A position where you can get rid of the body. The body is a hindrance in meditation practice. So avoid the pain, avoid the indulgence, get into the middle way. That is the right posture for you. Sitting on a chair is nice. At least some of the time you can sit on a chair, and some of the time you can sit cross-legged. That's also another possibility here. So please don't take these things too literally. Or rather, it is a matter of taking certain things literally, other things not as literally. Try to understand these things in context. The context is what actually gives meaning to these phrases here. Next one, you set your body erect. And again, setting the body erect also depends on right time and right place. We are here doing the Anapanasati. A high degree of mindfulness is required. And when you have good mindfulness, sitting the body erect is quite natural. It happens as a matter of course almost. But remember that we are at the beginning of meditation, often we're trying to establish that mindfulness, especially if you have been busy, right, with doing other things. The first thing is to establish the mindfulness. And if you set your body erect straight away, while you're not really mindfulness isn't established yet, it can often lead to not being very pleasant. You have to force yourself because it's not natural. So it is the right time and the right place. And what you tend to find is that when mindfulness arises, the body almost naturally wants to be erect because you because that is what clarity is like, right? The mind is clear, and that erect body actually enhances that clarity of mind. So it almost happens by itself. It's not something that you have to really watch out for. And I know many meditators, and these again are people who are very, very skilled in samadhi, and they often start off by, you're sitting, maybe leaning against the wall, right? Because you need to relax, first of all. You need the body to relax. And when the body relaxes and everything becomes peaceful and nice, and then mindfulness comes, then the body almost gets straight by itself, and then you sit straightly here. So don't be afraid. I think this is a very good technique actually to start off. Even if you like to sit cross-legged, start off by leaning back against something here. Just to wait, because you relax much better when you lean back rather than when you sit straight. You can allow everything to become nice and easy. And then when it becomes nice and easy, mindfulness arises. Then you sit straight, and then mindfulness of breathing happens as a consequence. So all of this is about time and place, right? So you need to know what kind of drives you in the right direction, towards mindfulness, towards ease, towards relaxation, towards a natural state of watching the breath. And then comes the last, the last one here, which is having established mindfulness in front of him. And this is one of these little phrases that causes lots of controversy. What does this mean? In front of him here is parimukkang, and people will quote the commentaries and says parimukkang means at the tip of the nose. That's what parimukkang means. And indeed, that's what the commentary says. I think it says nas agga or something like that, at the tip of the nose. Something like that. Again, I don't necessarily think that is wrong. I think that is probably an acceptable interpretation of this. But again, there are also other interpretations. There are people who have argued that if you look aside from the commentary and you just look at the suttas and you look at how parimukkang is used across the suttas in different contexts, so I think sometimes they have also brought out Sanskrit references to these things, and they have argued that it doesn't seem to mean just the tip of the nose. It means something more like in front of you. Mukha means mouth or face, and parimukha could mean something like around the face, or something like that. So basically in front of you. So just basically in the present moment, in the here and now, right? Right here and now. This is one interpretation of parimukha here. And I know the way that my teacher, Ajahn Brahmali, the way he teaches, he doesn't really say you should look at he says that this is breath meditation, it's not body meditation as such. So it's not about focusing on the point of the body, it's just about being aware of the breath. You are aware of the breath going in and out, and what aspect of the body is involved is actually irrelevant. It's just an awareness of the breath itself. So that could be at the nose, it could be anywhere, but it's just an awareness of the breath. And that is having established mindfulness in front of you. But the most important thing here is not so much about where we feel this. You can use the tip of the nose if you want, you can use the abdomen if you want. That is the favorite in the Mahasi technique. Or you can just do as Ajahn Brahmali says, just be aware of the breath. And any of those techniques are acceptable as long as the meditation is working for you, right? You're actually getting peaceful. It is taking you in the right direction. That is the most important thing here. It is whether things work is what matters. It is not the technique itself that is so important. One of the advantages of just being aware of the breath without focusing on any particular point is that it is often more relaxed. If you focus on a very, very specific point on the body, it can lead to tension. And I know that people have sometimes got tension. They start, looking at this spot, and after a while, the eyes get kind of closed in on the nose, and it gets very uncomfortable after a while. They get kind of painful eyes and all these kind of things. This has happened to people, and that is because you're not relaxed enough to really be able to watch the tip of the nose properly. This is one of the advantages of being more loose about it and just feeling the breath. The scope of awareness is a little bit broader. It means that you don't actually become so potentially, you don't become tense if you follow the broad way. You can still become tense. Anything can make you tense, but this is just one aspect of that, one way of thinking about it. Okay, so that is about the parimukkang, this particular word. And then of course the all-important point here, having established mindfulness, right? In other words, you have mindfulness is established first, then you start doing the breathing meditation. Mindfulness is first. It is a bit unclear here in the English translation, but in the Pali it's very clear. Satting parimukkhang upatapetva. It's a gerund formation. It means the action happens first, and then the meditation happens afterwards. The way it's translated in English here is not quite as obvious. Right? How do we establish mindfulness again? Well, the first thing is what we do here and now as we try to meditate, and the way that mindfulness is established here and now is just to wait, right? You wait for things to settle down, you settle the body down, you enjoy just being in the here and now, you allow things to become peaceful, and by guiding your mind skillfully in the here and now, mindfulness arises by just enjoying the peace of being present, by knowing that it's pointless to think about the past and the future. There's just too many uncertainties involved. And anyway, if you want to think about the past and future, it's better to do it after meditation, when you have a bit of power in your mind. Then you can do this kind of things. So this is the here and now, how we establish mindfulness here and now. So you wait till mindfulness arises, then you start a breath meditation. And of course, in the long run, it's also a long run establishing a mindfulness. And that long run thing is all the things we have been looking at so far. The whole first 6 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path are about getting to this point. So that is all about establishing mindfulness. All the first 6 factors. It's basically sila, right? Basically purity is basically what it is about. So these are... So that is how then you establish mindfulness both in the present and also through the practice over the long term. And then when mindfulness arises, and remember mindfulness means that your mind is fairly steady in the present moment, you're not going too much into the future, not going too much in the past, not fantasizing too much, you're fairly steady in the present moment, and you have clarity about the present moment. You're not dull, you're not confused, but there's a clarity and a sense of presence. You have to feel your way a little bit around this, because it's hard to be precise about these things. And as you feel your way around this, you come to understand what these things mean. So then, once you have established mindfulness in front of you, then ever mindful he breathes in, ever mindful he breathes out. Sattva how do you say this word again? Asisati, and pasisati. So and sattva is a combination of 2 words, satto and eva. Satto means mindful, and eva is this little word which can mean either it can mean an intensifier, and that's why it is said ever here. Ever is like an intensification, or it can mean something like only or just. So what does it mean in this context? Well, ever mindful means that you are mindful continuously, right? So it has this intensification. You're all mindful all the time. But the point of this particular sequence here of watching the breath is that mindfulness increases slightly as you go through, especially the first tetrad, the first 4 steps of the sequence. So I think ever mindful is a bit premature. I think ever mindful comes a bit further down. So I think personally a preferable translation is just mindful, or simply mindful. He breathes in, he breathes out. Simply mindful, just mindful. So why just mindful? Because the point here is that you're not trying to control the breath. Sometimes you hear about techniques, controlling the breath technique. I don't think that is the point at all here. It is just mindful, no control, no will, no doing is involved in this. You're standing back and just allowing the process to happen by itself. No control, no chaitana needs to be applied in this particular case. The chaitana, pretty much, the willing and doing pretty much comes to an end as you enter mindfulness, and that's precisely why you can be mindful. So that's a slight little variation, but it can be meaningful if applied properly. So just mindful you breathe in, just mindful you breathe out, and then come the steps of the Anapanasati Sutta. So first 4 steps here are equivalent to the Kaya Nupassana in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Kayanupassana being the contemplation of the body. So the first 4 steps here are said to be equivalent to that. And each, there's 16 steps together, so there's 4 times 4, and each group of 4 is equivalent to one of the Satipatthanas. So you have the Kayanupassana, Vedananupassana, contemplation of feeling, Chittanupassana is the 9 to 12, and then the last 4 is the Dhammanupassana, the contemplation of principles or laws, if you like. So let's have a look at the first 4 steps here. Breathing in long, he understands, I breathe in long. And breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body of the breath. I shall train thus, he trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body of the breath. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. So, this needs a little bit of explanation to understand exactly what is happening here. So first of all, you understand, right? In other words, you are aware, you know that you are breathing in long. This is the first thing. You will notice that in the first one it says understands, and from the third one, where he's experiencing the whole body, it says trains. There's a change there from understanding to training. So why is that? My guess is that the reason is because once mindfulness has been established before you even start Anapanasati, then it is natural that you understand this. You don't need to train any further. It just happens automatically that you understand the long and the short breath. But once it comes to experiencing the whole breath, then mindfulness has to rise to a new level. So in there is a training. Training doesn't mean that you use willpower. Training just means that you allow the process to take time. And you have sampajanya, so you know when the process is going in the right direction and when it is not, so that you can take whatever measure is required to make sure it's guided in the right direction. So understanding means it is already, you have enough mindfulness already. Training means you have to actually do this process for a while before these things arise. So then we have first of all the long breath, then we have the short breath, and many people who meditate, they say that if you watch the breath carefully, you will see that in the beginning it is longer, and as you calm down, become peaceful, the breath becomes shorter. So this may be what is referred to here. Perhaps it just means that you are aware of the breath short and long, but it could mean also that natural process whereby it's longer first and then becomes shorter over time as the mindfulness improves. Possibly. It's a little bit uncertain what that means, but that is one possibility here. And then the training starts, right? The idea, then you start to move and you start to expand your awareness. And the next one here is then the experiencing the whole body, sabbakaya patisang vedi. So this is, again, one of those points that tends to be controversial. What does it mean, sabbakaya patisang vedi? And you will see here that of the breath has been put into parentheses, because that's what the commentary says, that sabbakaya here means the kaya, the breath kaya. And as I mentioned the other day, kaya, actually, breath is actually called kaya further down in the sutta. So the commentary interpretation here seems to be very reasonable. You experience the whole body of the breath. After all, we are doing breath meditation, so it seems natural that we are following on with more breath meditation. So the idea here is that your mindfulness expands, and you're able to feel the whole body. In other words, the whole movement of the breath from the beginning to the end. Your mindfulness is becoming more powerful. You see more details in the breath, and this is quite likely, I think, what is actually the meaning here. Some people say that the meaning here is nothing to do with the breath. It has to do with actually experiencing the whole body, right? Feeling the whole body at this point. That is what some people argue. And although I find that unlikely myself, again, if one is in favor of that interpretation, just make sure that it works, that it actually takes you in the right direction. That is the most important thing here. So if it works for you, and it takes you to deeper levels of stillness, and then you go back to the breath later on, and again you become more and more still, then that is okay. If it doesn't work, well then maybe you should try just to be aware of the breath. So again, it is whether it works is really the final word in all of these things, and we don't really need to argue too much about these finer points, because I don't think it may not be necessary at all, and the meditation can possibly be done in different ways. So you experience the whole body, right? So the awareness is now becoming more powerful. You're starting to see details that you didn't see before. And at this point, then the next one is you tranquilizing the bodily formation here. Pasambayang kaya sankarang here. This is a little bit cryptic. Bodily formation, kaya sankara, what does that mean? And this, again, when you know the sutta as well, you know that kaya sankara is often a term used for the breath. So instead of calling it bodily formation, I might be better to translate it as bodily activity here. Right? The activity of the body. If you look at the latest translation on the Anguttara Nikaya done by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, he uses activity there as a translation for sankhara, which to me is much more meaningful than this word formation, which I always find, when I come to the word formation, I always feel slightly cold and wonder what exactly does this mean. Whereas activity, I think, is quite clear, and is also quite close to the meaning of sankhara. Sankhara is derived from the word karoti, which means to do, and then you have sankhara, the prefix san in front. So it has to do with doing, it has to do with activity, mental, bodily and verbal. Usually activity involving chaitana, so it is moral activity or ethical activity, but still activity. You have abhisankaroti, which is the verbal form. You find that around the suttas, which means to do or to create, put something together to make something. So all of these things are to do with doing, with activity. And of course the breath is precisely that. It is the activity of the body, right? The body does breathing. So it is the last activity of the body that we are aware of, and it's precisely the activity that the whole sutta here is about. So it makes very good sense. So then we tranquilize the bodily activity. The way it is written here, it sounds like we are perhaps actively doing it, but again, this is really a passive experience. You are just aware of the breath, and as you are aware, the more clearly you are aware, the less involved you are, the more tranquil it actually becomes. So you allow things to be. We're tranquilizing the formation, tranquilizing the sankharas. Part of this is getting out of the way and not doing anything here. So you're allowing this to happen all by itself. And then at this point things start to become very peaceful, right? This is where people sometimes lose the breath because the breath becomes very subtle. They can't find the breath anymore. The breath is gone. Sometimes they panic. I'm not breathing. What is going on? And they get fearful at this particular stage. But if that happens to you, there's no need to get fearful because the body knows how to breathe. You don't have to worry about that. So all you have to do is just wait. Wait in that peace. And then one or two things happen. Either your mind, or usually what happens is that mindfulness arises, becomes stronger, and then you can see the breath even though it is more subtle. Or what can happen is that the breath becomes more coarse after a while, and then you can watch it again. Or if you just keep on going into the stillness, then it is even possible that things like nimittas may arise at this particular point. So this is the first tetrad, equivalent to the kayanupassana, the contemplation of the body here. So there's a natural process of breathing, the breathing becoming more and more subtle. And during this process there will often be pamudja, some sort of joy or happiness may be present there as well, right? Because everything is becoming very beautiful and peaceful. So pamudja can also very easily arise at this stage. Okay, so that is the first tetrad. Now we're going on to the second one. And this is now coming into the Vedananupassana, the experiencing of feelings, right? So all this experience of feelings we were talking about before in the Satipatthana Sutta, all of that is included here in the contemplation of feelings according to the Anapanasati Sutta. So he trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing rapture, piti. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing rapture. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing pleasure, sukha. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing pleasure. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing the mental formation, the chitta sankhara. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing the mental formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the mental formation, pasambhayang chitta sankharang. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the mental formation. So here we are starting to feel the pleasure of anapanasati. Rapture is arising, and you can see you are still doing this while you are breathing. So the breath is still there. The breath is kind of maybe fading a little bit more into the background because the happiness is becoming stronger, and the focus on the happiness is there. But it's a bit like breath and happiness going together here. The two things happening more or less simultaneously. And as I was mentioning yesterday, this rapture is very often felt physically in the body. You can feel like waves of pleasure going through the body, or parts of the body, or it can feel perhaps a little bit more stable, depending really on the person. Different ways that this rapture can be experienced. The Visuddhimagga gives a whole list of different ways of experiencing rapture. So if you have any doubt about what you are experiencing, you can maybe check it out in the Visuddhimagga, and you may find your type of experience listed there in that particular in that particular place. I can't remember what those various types are, so I can't really give you any explanation of that, but it is in the Visuddhimagga somewhere if you can find the right place. So you experience rapture, right? This is when meditation really starts to become fun, because now happiness is starting to become very powerful. This is part of what we were talking about before. We were talking about the Niramisa Sukha, the Samisa Sukha, which is like the fleshly or the worldly or the sensual realm happiness, which has to do with the five senses. And here you're moving into Niramisa Sukha, non-carnal desire, if you like. Carnal, the word carnal means, quite literally, means flesh in Latin. So it's like the non-fleshly desire, the spiritual, not desire, happiness. The spiritual happiness is what is happening here. And at this stage, you're still feeling a mixture of things. The body is just in the background. The five senses are not far away. You're still experiencing some of the five senses. So here the feeling is a bit mixed. There's a little bit of Niramisa Sukha and a little bit of Samisa Sukha, kind of alternating with each other. And it's not a very clearly defined kind of happiness at this point. But anyway, we're moving here into this otherworldly happiness, and you're starting to get an experience, a feeling for what this means, right? You're moving here into the piti sambojjhanga, the awakening factor of piti here. So this is where things start to get very interesting and nice when you get to this point. So again, remember that training yourself here means allowing things to be, allowing the process to go by itself, not doing anything active. Then we have pleasure. This is sukha, and if you remember back to what we were doing before, we were looking at the process of meditation. It had piti, then passaddhi, and then sukha. Here the sequence is a little bit different. Here you go straight from piti to sukha, and these are just different degrees of happiness, and it's just different words used to describe these different degrees, and you don't have to place too much emphasis on the distinction between these things. It is just a sequence of various strengths of happiness and depths of happiness as you go along here. Then you have we shall breathe out experiencing the mental formation, the chitta sankharang patisamvedi. Now this is where it gets a bit more technical. Chitta sankhara in the sutras, it could be understood in two possible ways. One way is chitta sankhara is defined as sanya and vedana, right? So you're experiencing the whole field of Sanya and Vedana. You've been focusing on the happiness before. Now you're focusing on the whole experience, Sanya and Vedana. Another way a Chitta Sankara can be understood, it can be understood as the activity of the mind, the movement of the mind, the Chaitana involved in the mind. In other words, what is the movement? What is the remaining volition, the remaining will that is still being used at this stage? And both of these ways of looking at this are roughly equivalent, because what we're trying to do here is to calm things down. So whether you calm down your Sanya and Vedana, or whether you calm down the will by letting go, is roughly amounts to the same thing. The idea here is for things to calm down even further, even less movement, even more stillness, even less coarseness in the piti. Everything becomes even more peaceful. This is the idea here. So first you experience this, and the last one, you tranquilize this. You allow it by itself to come down to even more subtle state. So here, in a sense, we have piti, sukha, and passaddhi, in a sense here, whereas usually the sequence is piti, passaddhi, sukha. So these things are very, can be looked at from different kind of angles, and you allow the process to happen here. Right, and now it is getting very nice, right? Don't get excited. I was going to say it gets very exciting. That is precisely what you should not get at this stage. You should just enjoy it, right? This is the time to enjoy, to sit back, allow things to calm down even more. Just enjoy this fabulous experience of moving away from our ordinary world, moving into an entirely new world of pure happiness and joy, purely spiritual niramisa sukha that is happening here. And just enjoy that whole process, right? It's literally moving into a new world. It's opening your eyes. You're seeing some things that you have probably never seen before, or at least maybe some eons ago you were practicing the same way, and then you had these things, but then you lost it, right? And now you're back here again at the same place. Remember, this is the problem with samsara. You go back to square one and you have to do it all over again. So don't waste this opportunity. Now is our chance, right? We've all been there, done this before probably. And it is still that amazing experience when these things start to happen. So you tranquilize the mental formation. All of this is part of the Vedana Nupassana. You're experiencing these different types of happiness that are mentioned there. And then we move on to the Chittanupassana. This is the next one, the 4 steps of the contemplation of the mind, here done through the breath meditation. We are still breathing, right? The breath is still there. The breath is like the kind of guiding principle that takes us through all of these things, the things that we always get back to if we have any doubts about what is happening. The breath is the anchor of this meditation practice. And the first thing here we have is that we experience the mind. So what does it mean to experience the mind? And the point here is that at this point, when everything is becoming so tranquil, at this point the world of the 5 senses and the breath itself are fading so far into the background that there's almost nothing left of the kama loka and of the kama vachara. All of that is almost completely faded into the background. The world of sensuality, the world of the 5 senses, to be more precise, has almost disappeared. It is still there in a very subtle way, but the mind is now coming into prominence. Remember, the mind is the 6th sense in Buddhism. So when you abandon the 5 other senses, what you have left is the mind. The mind is what really remains at this stage. And this is where people normally tend to have these experiences of what is often called the samadhi nimittas. Now this is not a word you see in the suttas. This is kind of just a modern usage. In the suttas, the samadhi nimitta has a slightly different meaning, but that is the word that is often used these days. And this is like when you see a bright disk, right, in your mind's eye. Often people say, I've seen the sun. I was closing my eyes, but I could see the sun. It was so powerful. In fact, it was even more powerful than the sun. It was just overwhelming here. I remember a lady once came to me in Perth, in Australia, and she said to me that before she came to Perth, she had been living in Melbourne, and she used to go to visit the Mahayana monastery in Melbourne. She was of Vietnamese descent, and she would go to the Mahayana monastery, and outside of the Mahayana monastery they had this shrine to Kuan Yin, right? The goddess of mercy, used to be Avalokiteshvara, then became Kuan Yin in China and in that cultural area. And she came to the shrine of Kuan Yin and she bowed down to the shrine. And as she bowed down, she said she saw the sun. It was so powerful. It was absolutely overwhelming. She just froze in her tracks, and she kind of just stopped there. And she asked me what was going on. My eyes were closed, but I could see the sun. What is happening, right? And she couldn't move anymore. She was completely frozen by this thing. And she obviously felt incredible happiness. I asked her, felt incredible happiness, and she was just completely out of her mind, basically. And this was an example of very powerful samadhi nimitta arising almost spontaneously because of very powerful faith and devotion that this particular lady had. So this is what the samadhi nimitta can be. It can be this incredibly overwhelming experience where you feel that you are kind of losing yourself in these things. Anyway, at this stage, it probably isn't this strong yet. This was just a story that came to mind while I was saying this. So this is what comes at this stage, and this is what the experience of mind is like. And that is when the senses really fade into the background, big time. Sometimes the senses disappear completely. They are still accessible, but they have kind of faded completely at this stage. So, if that nimitta, that samadhi nimitta, or whatever the experience is, at the beginning it may not be very strong, so then you have to gladden it, right? You focus on the nimitta, and while you do that, again, you don't actually do anything, you just have this very still attention, you attend without any doing, and as you focus in the right way on the beautiful aspect of that nimitta, then gladness increases, right? So you are gladdening the mind, gladdening the experience. And as you are gladdening the experience, it becomes more and more powerful, and then you samahita, or samadhayang chittang is the next one here. You are concentrating the mind. If there is some movement in that nimitta, if there is still a little bit of activity going on, you still that by keeping your attention in the center of things, allowing the mind to become incredibly still, right? So here, stillness is increasing, brightness is increasing, happiness is increasing. All of these things are increasing as you go through this citta nupassana. You are learning about the mahagata citta. Remember, we were talking about the high stages of citta before? You're starting to learn about the mahagata citta, about the samahita citta, etc. that we talk about in the citta nupassana. This is what you start seeing here for yourself for the first time. And at this point, the experience is really becoming otherworldly. You really are leaving the world behind and starting to enter into a realm which is very, very different from how we normally experience the world. Very powerful. You have to stop yourself from getting exhilarated and excited, because it is such a powerful experience you're having at this particular stage. And then when the mind becomes unified and concentrated, the very last stage that you do is the liberating of the mind. And remember, the liberating of the mind, you're liberating it from two things. You're liberating it from the hindrances. Hindrances are completely, absolutely gone at this stage. And you're also the final liberation from the five senses. The five senses have already disappeared to a large extent, but if you want to, you are still able to turn your attention towards them if you want to. But once you have reached and gone through the process of liberation, vimutti, vimochayang chittang, once you have gone through that, the senses are no longer available to you. And this is the sign that you have attained another world, right? This time you really have let go of the kama loka utterly and completely, so much so that that world is no longer accessible to you. And this is why a jhana state, a state where you have vimochayang chittang, actually is the rupa loka, because you no longer have access to the other world. Just like we normally don't have access to the rupa loka in our ordinary kama loka existence, in the same way, once you enter fully the rupa loka, you don't have access anymore to the kama loka. These are different worlds that you're entering into in this way. And that is why And there is a very a shift in experience. The moment you enter jhana, there's a shift in perception which allows you to enter in. And it is experienced in different ways by different meditators. Some have the feeling of falling into this nimitta, this sun, you fall into it. Others have the feeling of kind of this nimitta just overwhelming them. But there's this feeling of final unification. Before this, the nimitta is there and you are still observing. There's still a sense of duality. When the jhana is entered, duality comes to an end. And this is why jhana states are often called ekata, unified states, ekodibhava, having become one. Right? This is what these things are. So very powerful. This is what happens at this point, and this is the feeling of vimochayang chittang. So this is the very last thing you do, is this liberating of the mind from these things. And once that has happened, then you don't do any, actually don't even do that, it just happens. And then you enter these deep states of samadhi at that point. So this is roughly the process that happens at that stage. And, this is... unless one actually has experienced these things for oneself, and not that many people have, it is fairly rare to experience these things. It is really hard to describe, and you really need to see these things for yourself. If you want to hear more details about the experience of these things, then somebody like Ajahn Brahmali is a very good person to approach. He has a lot of experience with very deep states of meditation and knows what happens with liberating the mind, etc. Then we come to the last tetrad of the Anapanasati path, and now we are moving into the insight aspect. I don't really like to call it insight. Well, yes, call it insight. I think that's a good translation. The insight aspects of Anapanasati here. And this is how it goes. This is like the Dhammanupassana, right? Remember that Dhammanupassana is mostly about understanding the 5 hindrances and also understanding the bojjhangas, the factors of awakening. And this here is roughly equivalent to that. And it goes as follows. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, contemplating impermanence. He trains thus. I shall breathe out, contemplating impermanence, anicca. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, contemplating fading away, viraga. He trains thus. I shall breathe out, contemplating fading away. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, contemplating cessation. He trains thus. I shall breathe out, contemplating cessation, nirodha. He trains thus, I shall breathe in, contemplating relinquishment. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, contemplating relinquishment. Pati nissaga. Nissaga is the last one there. So this is how the contemplation is done, right? And of course the interesting thing here is that it is based on the process that has happened before. You have just been through 12 steps of Anapanasati, and then you do this kind of contemplation. Do you have to do all 12 before you can contemplate? Perhaps not. You can probably start the contemplation a little bit earlier if you want to, but ideally the contemplation is based on the full process that has happened before here. So what are you contemplating? What is anicca? Anicca just means impermanence. That means you are seeing things changing. Things are altering, right? So as you go through this whole process of meditation, you see that things are changing. Everything is always changing. Feelings are coming. New feelings are arising. Old feelings are passing away. There's a changing process that you're going through. That is fairly easy to see, that as a consequence of this process, things change. Now, an important aspect of this change is this idea of viraga. The word anicca really includes viraga and nirodha themselves. But here, because it stands on its own, it probably refers to more a lesser type of change. But then the second aspect here is viraga, which then means fading away. Right? So what you do when you come to this stage, you look back on the process. You understand how things have been fading away. You see the fading away of various aspects of the of your experience, right? You see the body starting to fade away. You feel the senses fading away. You feel the breath fading away. Everything is fading away. You see the nivaranas fading away. This is a very important part of this. When you look back, you can contemplate the nivaranas, contemplate the hindrances. What happened to sensuality? What happened to your interest in kamaloka? What happened to sloth and torpor? What happened to restlessness? All of these things are fading away through this process, and you can come to understand at this point precisely the things that we're talking about yesterday. We're talking about understanding the hindrances, understanding why they arise, why they fade away. You can understand through this process going on here. So you look back, you look at those hindrances fading away. You look at the feelings, right? The worldly feelings are disappearing. The samisa sukha is disappearing. The niramisa sukha is starting to arise. And then the very last one is the patinisaga nupassana, the contemplation of relinquishment. So how is that different from cessation? Right? When something ceases, it sounds like you have relinquished it. So what's the difference there? And the difference is that things cease, thing comes to an end, but then as you contemplate this process again and again, and you understand these things, you understand the impermanence of things, and you understand the cessation of things, then there comes a time when that understanding is so profound and so deep, and it becomes universalized to all phenomena. You understand sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha. That's what you understand. And when you understand that, that is when fully, that's when craving itself is let go of. And when you let go of craving, when you relinquish craving, that is the patinisaga expression. You're letting go of craving completely, and that is when you have the liberating experiences from stream entry all the way to, especially arahantship, when craving never returns again and is forever relinquished. So there you are, those are the experiences. And if you think back a little bit, I'll take you, it was a little bit past 9, I will have to go on a little bit longer because I want to finish this sutta today. So please bear with me another 5 minutes or so. If you think back to the Noble Eightfold Path, at the very first day we were talking about the Noble Eightfold Path, and I was saying that the Noble Eightfold Path, it is Viveka Nisita, Viraga Nisita, Nirodha Nisita, and then Vosagga, it matures in Vosagga. What is maturing there? I can't remember what the Pali word is straight off the top of my head. Vosagga Parinama. Vosagga Parinama. That sounds about right. Okay, Vosagga Parinama. Okay, so Vosagga Parinama. Anyway, it means that it's maturing in Vosagga, right? Now, if you compare that to this process here, it is very, very much the same thing, right? The Viveka is what you need to even start the process. Then you have Viraga and Nirodha, which is exactly the same thing as here. Patinisaga and Vosagga are two words that almost have exactly the same meaning, slightly different prefixes. So it's the same thing here. So what you see here is that the whole Noble Eightfold Path is also included in this, the development of the Noble Eightfold Path through the cessation of things, through the letting go of things is actually what is happening here through the process anapanasati here. So anapanasati, what you're doing here is you are cultivating all those aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path which are based on this process that is happening right here. And exactly the same thing you also see in the Bhojangas. In the Bhojangas it says that the Bhojangas too, they are based on seclusion, based on fading away, based on cessation, maturing in Vosagga, maturing in release. Exactly the same thing, right? This is how these Bhojangas come into existence, and this again fits exactly what we are seeing here. So we are doing this contemplation in this way, we are actually allowing the Eightfold Path and the Sambhojangas, the Bhojangas, to come into existence. This is what they are based on this particular process that you are seeing here, and everything starts to happen here. So that is how the mindfulness of breathing fulfills the entire, all the Satipatthanas. It's a very powerful for that reason. And just let me finish off with the last two paragraphs here. Because that is how mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, so that it is of great fruit and great benefit. And just lastly, there is the Anapanasati Sutta continues for a long time after this. It continues by showing how the breath meditation is Kaya Anupassana, and then how then that fulfills the Bojjhangas, and how it eventually leads to Vidya Vimutti eventually. So the whole thing just goes on for many pages after this. But just to give you one quick taste of how this works, the very last paragraph here. I say that this is a certain body among the bodies, namely in-breathing and out-breathing. That is why on that occasion a bhikkhu abides contemplating a certain aspect of the body, energetic, clearly comprehending, mindful, and having abandoned desire and aversion for the sensory world. So again, this idea that the breath is one aspect of the body, right? It is called the kaya. It is a group of phenomena grouped together. This is what you find there. And again, this very breadth of scope for this word kaya can mean many different things depending on the context. Okay, so that is all for this morning, fortunately, because it's getting late already. And tomorrow, not tomorrow, this afternoon, I will not be doing the next sutta. The next sutta here is the Mahanama Sutta, which talks about different ways of giving rise to happiness and joy in meditation. It's actually a very beautiful sutta, and I wish I had time to go through it, because it shows a lot about how the process happens. But what I want to do is finish off the path, and that is right stillness. I want to have a look at the jhanas and the samma samadhi, and then how that eventually leads to full awakening at the very end. I want to prioritize that, and maybe tomorrow morning, if we have a bit of time, I can have a quick look at some of the aspects of the Mahanama Sutta in conclusion here. But that is what I will do this afternoon, so I will see you then here.